Hello, in this video we're going to demonstrate how to use radio button objects to allow the users to select between a set of options, and we're also going to show you how to use text field objects to obtain information from the user. So let's jump over to Eclipse and get started. The first thing we'll do is create a new Java project, and I will call this radio test because we need a short name. To this we will create a new class also called radio test. Alright. Now the first thing we'll need to do with our class is make it extend from application. And we will create our start method. Alright, what we're going to do is create a couple of text fields to get information from the user. So text field class from JavaFX, and we'll call this TF text field, and we'll use the default constructor. Okay, so we're going to now create another one in exactly the same way, and we'll call this one preferred column size. Okay, so what we can do with our text field, there are a bunch of properties which we can modify to get the behavior that we want. So what I'm going to do with our first text field object that we created is update the alignment to be the bottom right. And you'll see what this does when we run our program. So the way we set the alignment is using the pos class, and there are a bunch of constants that we can use. The one we're going to use is bottom right. Alright, we're also going to do the same thing with our preferred column size. So I will actually just copy and paste this. Alright. The other property we're going to modify is the preferred column count, which is basically the size of the text field. So we'll use two different values for each of our text fields here. So the first one, TF text field, we will set the preferred column count to be 13, and our TF preferred column size we will set to 3. Okay, so next up we're going to create a horizontal box to store our text field with a label. So we'll use the hbox class, call this hbox1 because we'll use a couple of these, and we'll pass in 5 as the parameter to the constructor to give us a bit of spacing. Next up we'll set the alignment of our hbox, and we'll set this to pos.center, and we will add our first text field to this along with a label so that it means something to the user. So hbox1.get children.add all, and the first thing we'll add is a new label, and to the constructor we'll pass in text field, and we'll also add our TF text field object. Alright, what we're going to do now is create some radio buttons. So you've seen radio buttons before, and what they allow the user to do is select from one of several options. So we might have this one selected, which means it has a little circle inside it, or when we click on this one, the circle moves. The point is we can only have one of these selected at a time. So the way we do this in JavaFX is to use the radio button class. So what I'm going to do is create 3 radio buttons. We'll call this RB left, copy and paste this line of code 2 more times because we'll have 3 radio buttons called center and right. We also need to update our strings. Alright, so what we're going to do now is create another horizontal box to store our radio buttons. So hbox, we'll call this hbox2. Again, we'll pass in 5 as the parameter to the constructor. We'll set the alignment to center. And what we'll do now is add our 3 radio buttons. So we'll add RB left, RB center, RB right. Next up, we will create another horizontal box to store the other text field that we created earlier. So hbox, hbox3, again pass in 5 to the constructor, and we will add a new label for column size and TF preferred column size. Alright, we'll add one more thing now, and what this is going to, well sorry, we'll create one more horizontal box. We'll pass in 15 this time, and what we'll do is set the alignment to center. And what we're going to add to this one is hboxes 2 and 3. So what we'll get is our radio buttons and our column size added to this horizontal box. So hbox4.getChildren.add all hbox2. Next up, we're going to create a vertical box. So the vbox class. And what we're going to add to this is this horizontal box and our first horizontal box. So we'll get all of this on the bottom and our original horizontal box all the way up here on top. So let's do that now. Oops. Alright, what we're going to do now is set up our scene and primary stage to get this on screen. Alright, we've got enough now to get our stage on screen, so we'll just create a main method. Okay, let's run our program and see what we have. Run this, okay, and you can see because we didn't specify a size for our scene, it's just automatically figured out how big our window needs to be, but we can resize it if we need to. So this is what it looks like. To start with, we must have forgotten to add something. We have our our radio buttons, but they don't work appropriately. What we expect is for only one of these to be visible at a time, and that's just not the case. So the problem is that each of our buttons don't know about the other buttons. This is important. So when we create radio buttons, we normally add them to a toggle group. And so what a toggle group does is we create a toggle group object and then we add all of our buttons to it. Or the other way around, sorry. We set the toggle group for our buttons. And then whenever we click on a button, the toggle group updates all the other buttons in the group. so that only one is ever selected. So let's do that now. What we're going to do after we've created our radio buttons is create a toggle group. We'll call this group using the default constructor, and all we need to do now is set the toggle group for each of our buttons. Oops. Okay, so now when we run this again, you can see that there is only ever one selected, which is great. So, what have we got to do now? Well, let's get some listeners on our preferred column size. Actually, before we do that, I've just realized that there's a mistake. The reason our what are we doing? The reason that our second text field is not appearing is because I've got a typo here. We don't want horizontal box 2 added here. We want horizontal box 4. This looks better. Now you can see we have our column size added as well. So what we're going to do now is add some listeners so that our text field properties change depending on the position of our radio buttons and depending on the column size. So you can see at the moment we initialized the alignment of our text field to be bottom right. So our text that we enter appears to the right. What we're going to do is change it depending on which radio button is pressed, and we're also going to change the size of the text field based on the value that's in here. This is not very hard to do, but we just need to add a few listeners, something that we've already done before. So what we're going to do is first deal with our radio buttons. So we need to add an action to each of our radio buttons, and it's going to be pretty much the same for each of them. So let's look at the first one. We have RB left, so we're going to set on action, and we'll use a lambda. And what we're going to do in here is just set the alignment of our text field. And so with the left, we want to set the position to be baseline left. Sorry, the alignment, I should say. And that's all we need. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste this for our other two buttons. Alright, so we need to change our constants here to baseline center and baseline right. So that's all we need to change the alignment property of our text field. So that's great. What we're going to do now is update the size of it based on the value that's in our preferred size text field. Alright, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to set an on action for our preferred column size text field. So text field pref column size dot set on action. So whenever something happens to our text field, we're going to use a lambda, and this time we're going to have an opening and closing block of code. So what we're going to do in here is set the preferred column count of our text field. And the value we're going to use, please press enter, there we go, is we're going to get the value that's currently in our preferred column size field, pass it to an integer, and then that becomes the size. So integer.parse int tf preferred column size.get text. Okay, and that is all we need. So now when we run our program, looks like it did before. So I'm going to enter some text here. You can see here at the moment none of these is selected. We can actually select, we can programmatically change what our selection is, but when I press right, nothing changes because it's already right. When I press left, the text aligns to the left. When I press center, it aligns to the middle, which is exactly what we expect. So now what I'm going to do is start changing the size. Whenever I press enter, you can see the column size change. Now, you'll notice that it doesn't exactly correspond to the number of letters, and that is because we've got a variable width font. So don't get too carried away about that. But you can see how the column size reflects the size of the text field. So with that, that's it for this video. We've learnt how to use radio buttons and toggle groups to get the correct behavior that we want from radio buttons. We've looked at how we can use text fields to obtain both get information or data from the user and modify some properties of the text field based on that information. So with that, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot.